Journey family. We're here to tell you about the baby bottle boomerang, which is our favorite time of year pretty much, right? So usually the Care Center in Huntsville will hand out bottles on Mother's Day. And so from Mother's Day to Father's Day, we use them as piggy banks and then we turn them back in full of money. But this year, obviously, things are different. So they are doing a virtual baby bottle boomerang.
And we are just a couple of kids, and we've raised $300.
It's pretty incredible. These kids have been doing their own virtual fundraiser for the last month or so. And we're actually up to $350. And some of y'all have been a part of that, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But now the Care Center is doing it all on their website. So the easiest way to do it is to go to their website and click on partnership, and there's a donations button right there that they can push. Right, Daisy? And then you can just donate with your credit card. The Care Center Huntsville is an awesome place that we are so fortunate and blessed to partner up with and help them every year. They do free ultrasounds, free testing. They do parenting classes and all kinds of amazing things for mommies and babies, don't they?
Mm-hmm. They also pray.
They do. They get to pray with people and tell them about Jesus. And that's your favorite part, isn't it, Max?
Yes.
So, we are excited and we wanted to encourage you guys to please go to thecarecenterhuntsville.com, click on partnership, and donate so that they can earn their money to help all the babies and all the mommies. And if these kids can raise $350 in a month, what can you do? Right? Thanks, bye!
Bye!
Good morning and welcome to the Journey Fellowship online. Whether or not you're in one of the house churches right now or you're at your house, we are grateful to be a body of the Church of the Living Savior. We are the church, we are the body of Christ on earth. And I'm so glad to be a part of that, especially in times when the world just seems like it's fraying. I don't really know. I kind of wish 2020 would start over again. But here we are with whatever is going on. So I have been praying for y'all. I've been praying for our friends. I've been praying for our families. That Christ would arise and that in our houses we would experience His presence and that His joy and love and peace and mercy would be the defining factor of our King on our lives. As far as announcements, we have girls group this Wednesday, unless something happens. But if y'all would like to be a part of that and you're not a part of it, you can message to Facebook and we can get you into it. Thursday night, we're going to have men's group. We've been going over the book of Mark. It has been wonderful. And then if you haven't finished your training for the online missions trip that we're doing, we need to get that knocked out. Outside of all of that, we still have our dear friends Eli and Mary sharing with us, and they've been going over the Friend of God series, and it has been wonderful. I can't wait to see all your faces and hug you. But until then, I love you all, and y'all have a good day.
Hey folks, it's good to be with you again. We're in this series of friendship with Jesus based upon a series of messages in John chapter 11. And we talked first, if you recall, about the wonder of friendship with God.
It is so amazing.
It's His idea?
Yes, He wants to be our friend.
Yeah, and what a privilege and an honor.
Yes.
That's the wonder of friendship with God. And then we talked last week about the wisdom
Yes.
of friendship with God.
Yes, how wonderful and good it is that He's so kind and treats us so well.
Yeah, and we did that character study of Mary and Martha, those two radically different sisters.
Yeah.
And how Jesus interacted with them based upon who they were and where they were, and helping them to become more like Himself. And so that's the wisdom of friendship with God. And today we want to talk about the power of friendship with God, or the victory
Oh, good.
ultimately the victory of friendship with God. We couldn't come up with a W word, well, win, but it just didn't sound intelligent
No.
to say the win of friendship with God. So the power or the victory of friendship with God. Yeah, it's awesome, because what we're looking at is this story of Jesus raising Lazarus, who had been 4 days dead in the tomb.
Yes.
And Jesus calls him to life. He
Yes.
calls him back from the grave. And in doing so, he declares himself Lord of life and death.
Yeah. He
And
does.
you remember last week we said that Martha, and Mary both said the same thing. They said, Lord, if you would have been here, our brother would not have died, knowing that he was Lord over sickness. But we said that he was going to show himself not just Lord over sickness, but
Yeah.
Lord over death and life. And this is such an important lesson. What we want to do today is jump into this statement. So we're going to have to look at Martha again a little bit, because Jesus dialogues with her. And we want to look at the statement that Jesus gives her, this great I am statement. He says, I am the resurrection and the life.
And the life. And I think what a great time to have a discussion about this together, because we've been in such a strange season, and more people than really in a long time are thinking about these things.
Sure, with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were telling me that when you were little,
yes.
death was a very scary
It was.
thing.
Was anyone else like this when I was small? Even honestly, when I was a teenager, the thought of death was so frightening to me. It seemed so other and honestly terrifying. It scared me very badly.
I had my first experience with death, I suppose, was a grandfather when I was little, but very, very little memory of that event. The first memorable occasion with somebody that I really loved dying was my grandmother. I was 18 years old and was actually in the room when she died, a hospital room.
Yeah.
And boy, I also was filled with anger and frustration and fear, I suppose, of the unknown. I would say hopelessness, certainly, even to the point of physically getting in my car after the event and punching the window and just full of just hopelessness.
Right.
Then about 20 years later, we mentioned, I think in the first lesson, our pastor,
Yes.
Joe Barnes.
Yes.
And-
we
and-
had the privilege of being in the hospital room with him. We were together with his daughter when he went to be with Jesus, and that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was actually holding his hand when he breathed his last breath, and it was a sacred
Very
moment.
much so. Very
And-
much so.
For me, the contradistinction between my grandmother's death, who I loved dearly, who was like a mother to us in so many ways. I mean, we stayed with her often. We spent a lot of time with her. And then 20 years later, the death of our pastor, who we said was like a father to us. The difference in my own heart between the hopelessness and despair of that first event and then the sacredness and hopefulness of the second event just can't be overestimated.
It can't.
And the difference is all attributed to the knowledge of who Jesus is.
Yes.
Because, for us and our family, we were not Christian people when my grandmother passed. And then when Pastor Barnes passed, we were very much steeped in the truths of who Jesus is as Lord of death and life. So I think that's an important point to bring out, because what Paul says later in the scripture is that we don't grieve as those who have no hope.
Isn't that true? It's very true.
Now, he doesn't say we don't grieve. We certainly grieved when Pastor
Absolutely.
Barnes
Oh,
went away. We grieved our
deeply.
loss and our,
Deeply.
the fact that we were going to miss him and still miss him to this day.
Yes.
So there was grief, but it was grief filled with hope.
Very
And
much.
that changes everything.
It does. It really does.
Right?
Yes.
And so that is in essence what we're looking at today. Jesus is going to give Martha and Mary and all of us hope that death is not the end.
He is such a good friend.
Yeah, and so really what we're saying as it pertains to friendship with Jesus is that Jesus is going to teach Martha and therefore all of us that death can't touch his friends.
Yeah.
And really what he's going to say is death can't touch me as Jesus. He's saying death can't touch me And later Peter would say that when he preached in the book of Acts. It was impossible for death to hold him,
Yes.
as he proved by his own resurrection. But the point of the thing is that he's saying death can't touch my friends either.
All right.
It's no comparison, because I am the resurrection of life. So let's set the scene up a little bit just to make sure we're all in the same place. When Martha, hears that Jesus is coming, she drops her food service and runs to meet him, and then she says those words, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." And she was right, probably, that if Jesus would have been there, he'd have been healed. But then Martha says these words. Remember, we said this about Martha. She exhibits mighty faith in this moment, because after expressing her regret, then it dawns on her, but wait a minute, he wasn't here, but now he is here.
Yeah,
so
you are here.
But even now, I know God will give you whatever you ask of him. And I think what she's saying there, I don't think she had the full revelation of him as the Son of God yet.
Yeah.
That comes later, but what she did know is that he had a special relationship with God,
Yes.
like nobody else did. And so she says, but wait a minute, God will give you whatever you ask of him.
How cool.
And then Jesus responds back to her and says, your brother will rise again. Now, here's, in Martha, when she replies back to Jesus, she says, well, I know he will rise again. This is important. At the last day.
Yeah. Yes.
I know he'll rise again at the last day. Now, we got to pause here for a second, because in that day, traditionally among the Jewish people, and you can see this even when Paul is teaching later, that it was a divided camp.
Sure, the Sadducees.
Some people did not believe in resurrection. They were called the Sadducees, and they didn't believe in resurrection. If you can't remember that makes them sad, you see. They were sad. They didn't believe in resurrection. That was the Sadducees, and then, that's really corny, sorry. Then the Pharisees were people who did believe in a resurrection, and the majority of them believed in some far off resurrection day at the very end of time, hundreds of years,
maybe
potentially thousands of years away, that there would be some resurrection. And so Martha, she's one of these that believes that, but basically what she's saying is, I believe he'll one day rise again, but what comfort is that to me?
It's not much help.
Martha in that moment was thinking, all I can think about is his empty room in our house.
Yes, and that seat at the table. That
The
he
dinner
just
table,
won't
he'll
be at.
never be there, or all the conversations that won't happen, or all the hugs that won't happen. So what consolation is some far off resurrection? And honestly, I think traditionally, as we think about death and dying, there have been two primary concerns, and this was from the pagan world through Jewish tradition, and even sometimes as Christian people, we still wonder about these things, but Jesus answers both of these great concerns. The two great concerns are, in essence, annihilation and separation. And what I mean by that is that when we lose someone, what we're concerned about is annihilation. Do they still exist?
Yeah.
Are they alive somehow, somewhere? And then secondly, is there recognition? Do they still know me?
Yes.
Or if there's going to be a reunion, will they at that point know me? And Jesus answers both of these great concerns in the heart of mankind with an affirmative yes. They are still alive, and they are still recognizable and will still recognize you.
Oh, good.
So here's another thought I want to say, that Jesus, listen, if all Jesus wanted to do with this great miracle is to bring comfort to Mary and Martha's heart, well, he could have just gone straight to the tomb. I mean, obviously he could have known could have found out where Lazarus' tomb was, and he could have raised Lazarus, then show up at the house with a big surprise.
That's true.
That would have both proved his power over life and death and comforted the sisters. But he has this teaching moment that I think is important for all of us to know. So what does he say? When Martha says, you know what, I know he's going to rise again at the last day. And so remember what she said, I know God will give you whatever you ask. So she's thinking that Jesus might have the power to ask God to give him the power so that he could do something
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
And what Jesus responds with is this statement, it's not that I have power or I can ask for power. He says, I am
Yes.
the resurrection and the life.
Wow.
And whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. So pause there for a second. I am the resurrection and the life. Life is not something I have, it's who I am.
Wow.
And therefore, whoever believes in me, pause, like your brother Lazarus.
Yes, because that's what they're talking
Lazarus
about.
was a believer. Yeah,
He
exactly.
believed, yes.
So whoever believes in me, like Lazarus, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me, like you, Martha, and like you, Mary, and like us as Christians, he says this, shall never die. Now, we don't have time to go into all of that right now, but what you'll find out as you study the words of Jesus is he was really reticent to use the word death.
It's true.
He talked often.
He always said they were sleeping.
Yeah.
They're asleep.
Yeah, he talked about that with Jairus' daughter. She's
Yeah.
just asleep. She's not dead. And he told the disciples early on that Lazarus, our friend, has fallen asleep. And
Yeah.
they didn't get it.
They
So
were
reluctantly,
confused.
he finally says, okay, I'll use your word. He's dead. But what Jesus is trying to tell Martha is that Lazarus right now, he's not annihilated. He
Yes.
hasn't ceased to be.
Right.
He is very much alive right now. And I
So
think,
good.
of course, the pushback from all of us is that we think, but there's a grave,
Yeah.
and we put him there.
Yes. You got to tell them about the George MacDonald story.
Oh yeah. So one of our George MacDonald's is he's one of our favorite authors.
We love his fiction.
Fiction in particular, and he was prolific. But one of our favorite books is called The Seaboard Parish, and in that book there's a preacher who's dealing with another character in the book who is the caretaker of the cemetery, which is at the church house.
Yes.
And this caretaker, God bless him, he's like driving himself crazy with
Yes.
making the people in the graves comfortable.
Yes, he's so worried every time there's a storm or snow. He's so worried that they're going to be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, so he's afraid they're cold, and so he's just frantic. And the preacher is like pulling his hair out, trying to help him understand. Wait a minute,
Yeah.
you don't understand. They're not actually there.
They're not in that
That's
grave.
their body,
Right.
but they aren't there. Okay, and this is exactly what
Oh, yeah.
Jesus is telling
It is.
Martha.
It is.
That Lazarus is actually not there. He's somewhere else.
Yes.
As is going to be evidenced in a moment. So the thing is that George MacDonald in this story, the preacher finally just says, okay, do your thing, take care of them. But I wish you could understand this and how much more hope you would have
Yes,
if
so
you
much.
understood that that is not the end. Death is actually a door that you walk through into a more wonderful and beautiful life.
Yes.
Death is not a state, it's an experience. It's
Wow.
just a door into something much, much better and much more beautiful. And Paul talks about this later in his writings. He's like conflicted. He says, to be here in this world is to help you, but to die is to be with Christ, which is far better.
So much better.
And he's like, I don't know which one I want. I'd rather be with God, but I think he's going to have me stay here with you for your benefit until eventually I get to go be with him. So that's really interesting because some of the commentators think when Jesus wept in this story, that certainly he was weeping in sympathy with Mary, but others say that he was also weeping for Lazarus because only Jesus knew the glory that he was calling Lazarus back from. Because that's exactly what Jesus did
Wow.
when he left heaven and came
He
to earth.
knows what he was leaving. Okay.
Yeah, and I often thought about that with Lazarus. Like, was he just like he loved his sisters, but was he slightly perturbed with
like,
them for
Oh,
calling him back
man. I don't want to go back. Yeah.
from that beautiful,
Yeah.
wonderful place
Yeah.
into this place? And so George MacDonald later says something that C.S. Lewis adopted even later and made it famous. But he said this line, he said, "We do our children a disservice when we teach them that they have a soul. They do not have a soul." And pause there for dramatic effect because
Yes.
everybody thinks this is heresy.
Wow.
But he goes on and he says, they do not have a soul. They are a soul. and what they have is a body. In other words, the primary essence is not what you see, but who they are.
Yes.
And going back to what we said in week 1, that's the reason why we can have such a wonderful friendship, a
Yes.
spiritual friendship, because that's the essence of who we are. God is spirit, and He's made us
Yes, we are
that
too.
way, right? And so it's as though I think of it this way: if you were to go to my home, I grew up at 13237 Laguna Street in
I'm
Houston,
surprised
Texas.
that you
right?
remember that. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's my address. But if you were to go there today,
You're not there.
the house is there, but
Yeah.
I'm not there. And then we moved to 3728 Summer Lane. And if you were to go there, you'd not find us, because now we're at 23 Lakeview Manor. And in each of these instances, that's just a shell, that's just a house.
Yeah.
But we've changed addresses, and for us, I mean, each time has been an upgrade.
Yeah.
And one of these days, it'll be the ultimate upgrade.
Yes.
And our body
Yes.
might lie in a tomb, but we will be.
We won't be there.
Yeah, with Jesus in heaven forever. So this first idea of, are they still alive? This question in Martha's mind, in all of our minds,
In all
of
of our
annihilation is answered by Jesus with an emphatic no.
Yeah.
He's not annihilated. Yes, he is very much alive.
Oh, so good.
Yes. And then the second question is there recognition?
Yeah, well, they know me. Do we still have a relationship of sorts?
Yeah, and I'll go back to what we said in week number 1. When Jesus used that term, our friend Lazarus, I want you to notice that Lazarus had already been dead at that point, because the journey,
Oh,
it only
yeah.
took him a day to get back. You remember, he delayed
Yeah.
2 days, and then it took him a day to get there. But when he got there, he had been dead 4 days.
That's
And so
true.
Jesus certainly knew that when he spoke of Lazarus as our friend.
He's
Now,
still our friend,
yeah,
Lazarus.
you see what I'm trying to say? So
Yeah.
his body was in the grave, but
That's
he was
cool.
still very much our friend. And I think what he's communicating to Martha is he's still very much Lazarus.
Yeah.
He has a name, and he'll answer to that name. He recognizes his name, and you will recognize him. In other words, he's still the friend of Jesus. He's still the friend of the disciples, even though he's in the grave. And he's still your brother, Martha.
Wow.
And you're still his sister. And you will recognize him, even though he be changed.
That's so good.
Isn't that good?
It is good. It makes me think, okay, have any of you ever had this experience when you go on a really long trip and then you come back into that international terminal?
Oh, yeah.
I
yeah.
love this.
You
I
go
love
through
this.
customs,
Yeah.
you go through all of that, immigration, and then that wonderful moment after you've got your bags,
Yes.
when those doors open
Oh.
and you're looking for
Yes,
your friend who came to give you a
searching.
ride.
And you just can't help but smile like a fool when you see them because you're so grateful to be reunited.
After a separation,
Yeah.
to be reunited. And
Yeah.
I believe with all my heart that's what heaven will be like. It will be like a train ride, a plane ride, or
good.
what Jesus says, you'll go to sleep and wake up in a new place. And I believe our friends will be there waiting for us. You will
Yes.
actually recognize your grandmother, and you will recognize your grandfather, and your loved ones who have
Oh,
departed.
thank you, Jesus. Yeah.
Now, obviously, the main point of heaven is to see Jesus,
Yeah.
but our friends will be there.
So cool.
And so he answers both of these questions that are in our hearts with an affirmative yes. And this changes everything.
It
So
does.
I need to say this, that if Jesus would not have actually raised Lazarus in this incident, what I'm convinced of is that Martha would have forever been changed, because her grief suddenly turns into hope, and her sadness into joy, her night into day, with this truth, in the same way that we talked about
Yeah.
those radically different experiences of death that we had.
Yeah.
Now the question becomes this. I think the pertinent question is what Jesus asked Martha.
Yeah. He said, "Do you believe this?"
Do you believe this? That's the big $1 million question.
It
Do
is.
you actually believe this? And notice Martha's answer. I really don't think at this point she had full revelation of who Jesus was. Nor did really anybody.
No.
But what she does say is beautiful, because she doesn't say, yes, I believe all the doctrine of death and life and that you're the Lord of death and life. But what she does say is, I believe in you.
Yeah.
She says,
Yeah.
yes, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God that was to come into the world. And that really is, that's the first step of faith, to say that Jesus, I don't understand everything, but I believe in you.
Yes.
And so the question for us is, do you believe in Jesus?
And give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward